presentation is going to be recorded and it will be available at ctstate.edu/webinars if you want to share it with anyone. And with that, I'm going to turn it right over to our presenters today.
So I want to say hello first. My name is Dr. Dave DiMatteo, Dean of Science and Math for CT State, and I am happy to welcome you and our two presenters, Amanda and Marina, who will be talking to you about math placement. As we all know, mathematics is critical to any student's progression in higher education, and it's really critical that we place students appropriately because if they are successful in math, it is a well-proven fact that they will be most likely successful on their college trajectory. And so we really want to lay out a game plan to help you as you are communicating to the students at the front line to help them to make the best and wisest choices. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Amanda and Marina to share their ideas.
Thank you, David, for that introduction. So on behalf of Amanda and myself, I want to thank all of you for attending and being here. And it kind of feels like deja vu. We've been here before. Last year, this time, we were probably doing the same thing, kind of giving you a training for our math advising. So we want to start by just making sure that we're all speaking the same language. So some vocabulary words. Starting off with non-STEM pathway. So what does non-STEM mean? Non-STEM means any program that does not require college algebra. So for example, majors in humanities, business, social sciences generally don't have college algebra in their pathway. The STEM pathway are programs which do require college algebra. So any of the engineering, any of the sciences, some of the health career pathways actually do require college algebra. So we do know that. So there are some things which are going to overlap. And then you have the word called goal placement. Goal placement means the course the student requires in their program. So that's considered the goal. So if it says courses for math, for transfer level course, a program says a student needs math 1100 or above, and say recommended 1100, so 1100 becomes their goal placement. You have what's called the default placement, is any course below that becomes the default placement. So a student can place into that as a default, and they can place it with just place into the default class with just their GPA. And then we have the ALEKS PPL, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with because we've used it before in the past. It's the placement tool, prep and learning tool at no cost, used for students to test, see where they are, remediate, and retest to place them into the goal placement course. So what have we done so far? What were we asking you? So last semester, when we trained all of you, we gave you a process. The way we were asking advisors to advise was meet with the students, confirm the major if they have picked a major, collect the multiple measures that they have, which could be GPA, the SAT scores, ACT scores, the self-appraisal, or the PPL, then make sure that we know what the math course is for that particular program, and then give them the PPL, encourage the students who didn't get into the goal course with their SAT scores or their GPA to take the PPL and remediate, and then meet with the student again to put them into the appropriate class if they moved up. How did we know that this did not go as planned?
So we've heard from many of you that it was a cumbersome process that began immediately because everything hinged on being able to identify their permanent major. And so many of our students come in not being able to make that decision at their intake appointment. That required a ton of time on your behalf. And in many cases, time you didn't really have. In addition, there were too many branches in the advising process, right? With 6 appraisals that you had to navigate the right appraisal for the right major. In addition, students were coming in and they weren't confident in their self-reporting of their GPA. Students come in, you'd ask them what's their GPA, and they would say, can you give me an example? Doesn't put a lot of faith in the accuracy of that metric. And again, those self-appraisals, even if you were able to navigate to the correct one quickly, they were really time consuming to deploy, to have the students read. Many students misinterpreted, tried to do the math instead of just checking, can I not? And then this is one of the really big issues because this was expensive. Too many students took PPL but didn't enroll in a math class. So out of all the codes that were used, only 50% of students registered. And of all the students that used PPL, which was basically the state purchased a code for them, only 10% opted into the remediation component to boost their scores. So that was a very costly problem with the process. And then in addition, there wasn't a great way for you all to record how the students were initially placed so that subsequent advisors that were meeting with students, if they got assigned to a different advisor once they picked their major, there wasn't a good way for you guys to access the information. And then on our end, there was no way for us to access the efficacy of how this time-consuming process was working. Which is why some of you may have been invited to small group, think of them like focus groups where we took your feedback. So the changes that we're implementing are a result of the feedback that we heard from you of what was going wrong and what needed to be improved, as well as the cost that was associated with PPL. So what are we going to do to improve it, right? The biggest issue was how time consuming it was to get down to the math placement in that intake appointment. So that was really the focus of our plan, was to decrease the amount of time it takes for you guys to give a student their first math class. And so the way that we did that was to remove steps. So instead of you having to be sure of a specific program so that you can, give them the right self-appraisal, we've just broken it down into STEM and non-STEM. Do they need college algebra or above, or do they not need college algebra and above? So that should right away save you some time. Now, because we've clustered it this way, the STEM and the non-STEM are going to be slightly different from each other, but each of those two processes will have less steps and less repeat visits for you. So overall, you should see a better flow moving through the process. So again, when we think of non-STEM, we're really looking at it from the math lens of, do they require 1600 or higher? We've created a list for you, but sort of off the cuff. You're thinking humanities, you're thinking business as our primary non-STEM programs. In these paths, the way that we're working to simplify the time needed is to remove the number of placement levels. So instead of there being 5 placement levels in the non-STEM pathway, there's going to be 3 placement levels. The big change is we would like to empower you to consider for the default placement these 1000 level courses, 1000, 1001, 1002, and 1003. Now, just to reiterate, this is non-STEM only. These are not the classes for students who are in the other pathway. We want to remove PPL as the primary placement tool for students in this non-STEM program, and we'll sort of walk you through in a second how we do that. So the sheet that we've put together for you all, right, that the list, it's going to be an Excel spreadsheet that has all the programs, but then there's a tab for non-STEM and a tab for STEM. So you can just open this spreadsheet, Control F, type in the keyword of what the student's doing. If you find it in non-STEM, you're following this process.
So this is the chart for the non-STEM, the placement chart. And you'll notice that the only row that's different is the second row, the blue second row. The first row and the last 2 rows are literally the same as we've done before. So we've added this additional option for students if they have a GPA of less than 2.8, an ACT score of less than 17, or an SAT score of less than 510, or they don't have any of these things, they can start with 1000 or 1001, 1002, or 1003. They can definitely still take the developmental courses. That option is always there. They can take developmental courses, take the boot camp, do BPL, remediate. They can definitely do that. But we've just opened it up so that the students and advisors have more options to advise students. The 1000 levels were easier because they don't have any prereqs, right? They don't have anything. You don't need to have had Math 0988 or 0989. You can take it directly. The other levels are exactly the same as before. Nothing has changed to the other levels. They still can take they can still get into the correct classes with a GPA of 2.8 and 3.09. And they can also take Math 1011 with that same GPA. Or they can go directly into the standalone 1011 and 1200 with a GPA of 3.1 or higher. And here is a flow chart which kind of gives you an idea of the path. So what we could start off with, the student could start in developmental if they want to, and the pathway would take those who need to go into, say they want to go into Central and they need to take a course, they could definitely take the 1011. Would be a great course for them if they want to transfer into Central. And so that course will give them math credit. Whereas these other math courses, Math 1000, Math 1001, 1002, 1003, are courses that will get them math credit for the community colleges, may not transfer as a math class. So it gives them open electives, whereas Math 1011 will transfer as a math course to Central for sure. So students can, from the 1001, kind of take 1100. They can also go from there to take 1200 if that's their choice, if that's their goal course. So taking the 1001 will kind of give them some kind of a success in a math class, the first successful math class, to make them build their confidence a bit. So then they can say, okay, maybe I can try a transfer level math class. So these are courses for students who feel very uncomfortable, may not be very confident of their math levels. So they can take a course, be successful, and then go into the transfer level math class.
So when we, again, summarize this default placement for non-STEM, in this new process, the big change is that all students have the option to start in courses 1000 to 1003, right? And we're going to go through what these courses are in case you're not familiar. The students still retain the option of going into developmental. Okay, so the only change is that these lower level 1000s, the placement metrics have been lowered to allow them to be the equivalent starting band. So if a student has a low GPA, a low SAT, or a low ACT, any of these courses above can be their default. So from developmental through 1003 can be their default placement. If a student has no metrics, they come in, it's the day before classes start and they have nothing, they've been out of school for a while, any of these classes can be their starting launch point in the non-STEM pathway. Any student placing below 1100, 1200, and 1201 should be asked if they're happy with that placement. You will still have access to the self-appraisal, but we're only giving you 2 of them. There'll be a non-STEM and a STEM, and you can use that at your discretion to guide your conversation on if the student is happy with their current placement. If they're happy, wish them a great term, right? If the student says, I feel good about going into this math for finance or this quantitative literacy class, I don't really want to, I don't want to rush my math experience, fantastic. The student really wants to consider developmental, fantastic. But if the student needs 1100 and they want to be done in one semester, you're going to register for the default class that you think best works for the student. And you're going to hand them the new PPL flyer, which will be coming out shortly, which will include the directions on how to set up their accounts, how to take that initial test, but then put the emphasis on the student needs to remediate and then retest in a proctored environment. There will also be blanks added so that you can include the needed score and the needed goal course for their program, their pathway.
So here is the self-appraisal that I know many of you have seen before. So now we only have two. One, this is for the non-STEM. So this is just to help conversation. I know many of you are already doing this without having this actually written out this way. You kind of come up with your own method of doing this, but this is just a tool to use if you want. And one of the things, if you can see, is these three different columns, just to kind of go over it again. If the student is kind of mostly in column 1, then you might say maybe that default course is the best course for you to start off with, and then see how you do, and then take the PPL, see where you place, and then remediate and try to move into your goal course if they were not happy with their initial placement. If most of if they're kind of in the second column, then maybe maybe you could recommend that they take the PPL and say place into the COREC class, right? So they could be a person who would be ready to take the COREC class. Or if they're pretty much all in the third column, then again, give them the PPL and say, maybe you're ready to take the college level class. So you can skip all of this and go straight into your goal course. This is all just to help us make the conversation, help the student, and for you to help guide the students to make the decision that they need to be successful in their first math class. So one of the courses that we are talking about is Math of Finance, which is it is a 3-credit course. It satisfies graduation at the associate level for math, give you math credit for an associate level. What does it cover? It's an elementary course with a wide range of basically personal finance math. It's really what it is. Very useful for students whose level is their math skills are a little bit low and they're very afraid and not sure if they'll be successful in math at all. This is a really good stepping stone to help them feel comfortable saying they're able to do some amount of personal finance, which they can use in their day-to-day life right away, right? And early indication data shows that students are successful in this class, probably more successful in this class than developmental math classes, because the developmental math is mostly algebra based, whereas this is basically all about finance. This is ideal for students who don't want to go on to any other transfer program. This is the end. They're not going to take any other math classes. They just want to get an associate. That's all their plan is. They just want to get an associate. This is a great course for them. The cons is that it won't transfer as a math course to the CSUs. It has transferred. I've seen it transfer to some of the private schools. Again, I don't know for sure which ones they are. And you might get, they do get transfer, open elective transfer, not math credit. And again, the last thing is it's not offered in many campuses. So that's another reason why it's not the greatest course for everybody. But if it is going to be, now the schedule is going to be out soon. So if your student is the person who could do it with this, you could look at the schedule to see which campuses offer it and suggest the student take that course.
So the next course that might be new to your advising routine is the Math 1001, which is the quantitative literacy course. Again, it's a 3-credit class that does satisfy graduation at our level, the associate's level. This class is like an introduction to mathematical reasoning, and it offers an emphasis on numerical fluency. It includes some of the basics of personal finance, but doesn't go as deep as the Math for Finance into the taxes and things like that. It offers an introductory look at data analysis, some basic statistical processes, and it also offers an introduction to the basic probabilities and probability theory at a very approachable level. This course has been offered, and the early data does indicate that this course may be more approachable for students at the developmental level than developmental algebra is. Another bonus of this class is that it dovetails really nicely with the 1100. Now, dovetail sort of is a pro and a con because there's overlap in the course, in the two courses. So for instance, in the Math 1001, they may go as far for personal finance to look at simple interest. And then in the 1100, they review simple interest and build on it to go into compound interest, right? And the same thing happens with the other big topic areas. Not all students want to have that deja vu experience of seeing something twice. And for that student, they could choose if this is their first course, if they want to go to stats. So this course can be the entry level regardless of whether they go to 1100 or 1200 as their goal course, or and it could also be the preview, right? For a student who's super nervous about getting to their 1100, having the opportunity to coach them and say, well, if you want to kind of see it in a light version, this might be a good opportunity for you to get an overview. And then if it doesn't go fantastic, we can talk about options. But students who successfully complete this at a D- will earn graduation level credit at our institutions. But it doesn't satisfy graduation at the CSUs. It only transfers as an open elective and not a math credit. And again, we have limited course offerings and modalities in the rollout, right? As we see what makes sense from the advising lens, we'll have to adopt and adapt to our schedules and modalities as the needs present themselves, right? That is the one thing we don't really have that intuition of how many sections and what modalities are preferred. So we're going to see the need for you to potentially, if this is the right course for a student and it's not offered at the right time or in the right modality at your campus, to be looking at other campuses. Really leverage the one state system to get students into the right class. So the next course is Math 1002, which is Math for Science and Tech, has some of the same pros. It's 3 credits. It will satisfy graduation at the associate's level. This is an introductory college level reasoning course, but it has the emphasis is going to be on the technical applications using scientific notation, unit conversions, and right triangle trig. It does currently satisfy the prereq to concepts of chem. This course has never been offered in CT State as of yet, but it is designed to be the ideal course for students who want to begin their journey with us in the technical programs like automotive, if they are in railroad or firefighting or construction management. This course is really being designed for those students. Students who take this would be eligible to move on to the 1100 or 1200, but this is really for those students who want that access to a math course in the context of science and technology. The cons are it doesn't satisfy graduation. It only transfers as an open elective, not a math credit to the CSUs, and you will see extremely limited course offerings. The schedule hasn't been finalized, but I know that Gateway is going to be offering one section in a high flex modality so that students can choose to come to campus or stream as an LRON. It may be the only section in this first semester of its offering.
The last course in this sequence is the Elementary Statistics, Math 1003. This, again, the pros are just like the others, satisfies, is 3 credits, satisfies graduation at the associate level. Amanda, are we?
Oh, sorry.
So it's an introduction to college level statistics. And we don't go to statistics into the depth that we do in 1200, right? So we just introduce everything, just like we're introducing certain concepts in Math 1001 that can be gone into more depth in the 1100 class. The same thing with just laying the foundation in the Math 1003, just descriptive statistics, just a little bit of visual statistics, showing you how to look at data visually, and then basic probabilities. And that's pretty much all that's done in this class. And this class also does show that, again, early, very early data shows that this course is more successful than the developmental math class so far, which is, again, very small data set that we have, right? Because they haven't been offered. These are courses that hasn't been offered across the system at all. It's very few campuses that offer this. And this course definitely dovetails, again, very nicely with Math 1200 because it's laying down the foundation for the 1200. So students, like Amanda said before, may not want to do this again because they've seen this and might want to take 1100 instead, which they can. So both these courses, Math 1003 and Math 1001, dovetail or can be prereqs, and 1002 can be prereqs for 1100 and 1200. This is going through a curricular process right now, so it's going through the governance process at this point. All these courses have gone back to the campuses for feedback. What are the cons? Again, it doesn't satisfy graduation at the CSUs. It only transfers as a math elective and not necessarily a math course. And like before, very few limited offerings. Again, we would be looking at the schedule that's coming up, and if you find that your student would benefit from this course, I would suggest you talk to the math faculty to see maybe they might want to offer it, or maybe it's in another school, right, that they may want to take it. Again, if this is not the course they want to be in, eventually place them into the course and give them the PPL so they can actually remediate and go into the goal course that they want. So we're not telling students to stay in the course that they don't need. We're trying to help them place them into a course initially so they have time to remediate and then move out of this into the course that they need to get into. So again, it's all about taking the PPL, remediate, and placing into the goal course, not staying in what a course they don't want.
So I just want to highlight also that the developmental options are not going away, and they remain valid options for default placement for some students, right? So pros are that these courses continue to be a great opportunity for the review of high school foundational mathematics. And you'll see the widest course offerings. I didn't put it in the slide, but it just came to me, right? You're going to see a lot of sections of these available to you because these courses are also remaining in the STEM pathway. So these become courses that are also in the default pathway, the default placement process. And these courses offer early exposure to the graphing calculator. These courses satisfy the prereq to Math 1011, which is the lowest level course that will transfer for math credit to Central, give students a great foundation in reasoning, logic, and modeling in an applied manner. These courses also serve as the prerequisite to Math 1010 in the STEM pathway, which makes these courses a really good option for students who are completely undecided, right? A student has no idea what their transfer goals are. They have no idea what their immediate goals are. These become the safest options because this really does allow the student to branch in any direction. But it would be highly encouraged that they do the work at the same time in the CCS course to get direction and a plan so that when they make that critical next course decision, they're moving down the correct path because they diverge after this. And another pro of the developmental is the grade is exempt from graduation GPA, so that, if they don't do fantastic, it's not going to bar them from graduation down the road. The cons are these do not satisfy graduation at any level. So an A in this class doesn't actually get them graduation credit. It does make them eligible for many, many courses, but it doesn't get them that graduation box ticked at even the associate's level. Another thing to caution is that the 0988 is 6 credits. And while the grade is exempt from the graduation GPA, the grade can in fact impact the financial aid GPA, which can in fact impact their financial aid status. So when the students are taking a 6 credit class, they do need to be aware that their grade's important. Just because it's developmental doesn't mean it doesn't matter, right? And so as you find students for which the 0988 it's the best class, there needs to be this recognition of the importance of success in it. So we've kind of come up with what needs to be done between the advising team and the math team before we launch, which we know launch date is actually yesterday or a few days ago for the fall. Even though the schedules aren't live, we know that you are seeing new students already. So, right, one thing you can do is familiarize yourself with the list of the non-STEM programs, that first sheet in the spreadsheet that we're going to provide for you. And familiarize yourself with any courses that are new to you, right? So, you can request from your math team the master syllabi to actually look at the templates. You can reach out, ask questions about it to your math team. And then we're going to be providing you with that new revised flyer, and you should have physical copies ready so that you can just go ahead and write in the program, the goal course number or numbers, and the placement scores that the students need to get in their second proctored assessment, right? Again, we want to just remind you that we're really pushing for students to be registered and then leave with the flyer after registration with their goal listed on that flyer. We also are hoping that you have some literature that can be handed out in a physical copy with screenshots of the add drop procedure. If that's not available, we would ask you to work with your local leadership teams. As faculty, we don't have access to the banner screens from the student perspective, so we're not able to provide that for you, but leadership should be able to get you an adequate process for students to add and drop a course, especially if they already know what the course name is and what the course score is. They wouldn't need to come back to have their schedule changed. And we also think that it's a good idea for campuses to prepare a chart of the COREC CRMs for the 1100 and the 1200 to be handed out for students who are interested in trying to bump up. So if they're in a default placement, bumping up might be bumping up to the COREC level. We do know that the way that the course search works, though, it can be really clunky for students to navigate, finding the linked sections. So just to give you, I'll give you an example in a second, what that looks like. But, your math team is there. So if you have a need, reach out to your math team. You can continue to reach out to Marina and you can continue to reach out to the dean. But a chart, something like this that has the CRNs, right, put together, it has the times that both courses meet, so you can see which section, when it really starts and when it really ends, and those kinds of things. Okay. These are sort of the prep things to make that appointment go smooth and quick, right? That's really the goal.
So now we're going to talk about the STEM pathway. So again, when you think of STEM, the way we think about it is by any program that requires college algebra or higher, right? So we will, like Amanda said before, we will give you a list of those programs on a spreadsheet. But just to have an idea, it'll be typically your engineering courses, programs, the math science courses, and all of those are the major programs which require college algebra. In this pathway, students will need college algebra, right? Because it's the pathway to calculus. So college algebra will be their goal course initially before they can take anything else. But I know we have said for a long time that developmental courses and Math 1010 is going to go away, but it is not going to go away. It is still going to be available for our students who are in the STEM pathway for sure, right? Students, if they're placed into developmental, then they need that. They need that foundation, but they can place into that, take the PPL and move out. So that PPL to move out is still going to be available, but they can still decide, I want the developmental, I want to take the 1010, and then I want to take the 1600 because I want a better foundation. they can still choose to do that. That's a choice that they have. But if they decide that they just need a quick remediation, place them into whichever course they make. The default course they can place into is either 1010 or the developmental, using just their GPA and another multiple measure. So they could place into those. But if they are anxious to get into the course they need, then give them the PPL so that they can remediate and go on to the course they need. So we're trying to reserve the PPL for people who need it to move up. So place them into their default course first, and then tell them remediate, and then take a practice test to be able to move up into the course that you want to. So either the co-rec or the standalone class, if they can make it into that. So this is the chart for the STEM students. Again, you're going to notice nothing has changed. Literally nothing has changed in this. So there's no change in the STEM progression in the placement chart. There's no changes. It's all exactly the same. The default courses a student could place into, when I say default, means the courses that they can place with GPA is 1010 and below, right? So all of those courses you can place into. Now, if you want to place into the co-rec class, Math 906 and 1600 or above, you need to have an SAT score and ACT score, right? You need to have one of those, or you place it into the default course, take the PPL, and then move up. So if you don't have those SAT scores, but you want to take 1600, place into the course that you are by default, and then give them the ALEX placement test so that they can move up into the course that they'd like to get into. And this is sort of again, the pathway, the STEM pathway that you can see, which is not changed again, same as before, never, it's always going to be the same. You start with developmental if that's where you are. You can, the green pathway is a special pathway just for the education majors. So that's a totally different pathway for just education majors. The other blue path is the path to calculus, right? So a student could take the developmental, place into 1010 after they finish that. They could take 1012 too, which is trigonometry with embedded algebra. Not many schools offer that. But from 1010, the path is still the same, right? And you can see that they can go directly into the 1600 and then 1610. So that's the path that we have already made for the students.
So just to recap, the STEM pathway placement into the STEM pathway hasn't had very much change at all, right? In this process, all students must have a numeric placement to place out of the default courses of developmental, right? So a student who comes in with absolutely nothing, they're developmental. They're going into the 0988, 0989, and you would have to use your discretion on which one is ideal for the student based on your conversation. If they have an exceptionally low GPA, SAT, or ACT, again, the developmental is their default course. And then if the students place below 1600, so they have some initial metric, whether it's a middle GPA, something above a 2.8, a middle SAT score, but they're still below the 1600, or they're the developmental, you should ask them if they're happy with their placement. And again, this is where that self-appraisal can come in if you choose to use it to help guide your conversation about whether trying to move up before the semester begins is an appropriate opportunity for them. If the student is happy with where they're beginning, right? If the student gets put into 1010 and they're happy, you wish them a happy term and you move on. If they're not, you register them, say in that 1010 or developmental, and you're going to hand them the new flyer, which will have the directions on how to test, remediate, and retest, and the blanks for you to add the needed scores for their goal course, which should be Math 1600 or higher. You're going to hand them the documentation to add or drop. And if you've got that grid, you also hand them the grid on the co-recs in case they don't quite move into the standalone 1600, but they move into the co-rec. And some students that even if they elevate their placement into 1600 using the PPL remediation may still prefer that security blanket of doing the co-rec together, knowing that extra time with their teacher, that extra support. But basically this process hasn't changed. It's the sequence that we'd like you to register them in PPL first. Register them in the course first, and then give them the PPL to do afterwards. Because for a student who is happy, they don't need to use PPL, right? That's the big thing. And then this is the guiding, the STEM self-appraisal that you can use to guide your conversation. Right. So a student that's all in this column 1, that they're very nervous, developmental is probably the right default course for them, especially if like their GPA is a 2.8, whether, you're trying to decide, do I put them in 1010 or do I put them in developmental? If they're in that column 2, that's an indicator that 1010 might be a good starting point or a good goal for them to remediate to, even if their GPA or SAT were super low, that remediation is likely to happen into at least 1010, right? The more students we can move out of developmental, the more students stand to being able to graduate on time or at all. And again, if they're in this column 3 or column 4, and they don't have the metrics to place into either the co-rec or the standalone college algebra or above, please really push them, highlight how capable they are. And with just a few hours of content review in PPL, they will be able to elevate their placement.
So just like before, what needs to be done to launch, right? So just like we said for the non-STEM pathways, so we get a list of all the STEM programs, which will send you a spreadsheet with all of them, and familiarize yourself with the calculus pathway, which I know all of you already have that. Then we want to make copies of the PPL flyer with the new code, right? So the new codes are coming out, and which the program they're in, the goal course or courses that they need, because some of them may need more than one math course, and the score they need for the proctored assessment to get into that, right? And then prepare this add drop procedure so the students, like Amanda said earlier, empowering the students to do this themselves. And again, we are only trying to help the students. At the end of the day, I know a lot of you advisors are doing a lot of this on your own to help the students. So thank you. And also prepare the chart, like Amanda had shown earlier, the course and the prereq and the co-rec together, because they're not linked. So they show the co-recs in one area initially, and the college level course is completely separated. So it's kind of hard for the students to really find the two courses. So if somebody in your school could put all the course with the co-recs together and show the students which ones that they could take, that would be very useful for the student to do. And also just to kind of keep in mind, we had stopped, Connecticut had stopped giving the SAT scores, the SAT test during COVID, but now since 2023, all juniors are mandated to take the SAT. So having said that, that doesn't mean the students will come with the SAT scores to you, but you know that they have taken it, and so they should be able to access it from somewhere. But again, these are all just options that they have, but we know our students, so these are things that they could come later on with if they have it. So you can see on the next slide the courses and the support course and the college level course, right? You can see how they're linked together, the CRN, the timing. So this would be helpful for all of you, as well as the students, if they have a list of these courses put together.
So, right, anytime there's even a small change, it does impact students that are already in the pipeline, right? So when we think about continuing students who were advised into a math class this semester that we're currently in, where do they go after that, right? For fall. So you're going to see students who need to progress in the non-STEM pathway and they've completed developmental already, right? So you've got a student who either took developmental last semester and took this semester off, or a student who's in it right now. We're going to be providing you flowcharts for the continuing math students based on what course they are taking right now or have taken previously and the grade they need to progress in all the different pipelines and varieties, if you will. All the flowcharts that we're showing you today will be available when we get you the PPL cohort codes. We'll be providing you all of this additional information as well, the spreadsheet, the PPL form. So this gives you an example, right? So for students who have developmental with a C- or higher, these are their options, right? And with a D- to a D+, these are their options, right? Now, we do have the option for students who took developmental to progress into the 1001, 1002, 1003. But really, because these are equivalent placements, it's perhaps for many students a better plan if they were successful at the lower level, instead of going to a class that is not transfer eligible, to take the co-requisite class at that point to be eligible upon one more semester to actually have satisfied both graduation at the associate and the baccalaureate levels, right? So you'll see all of the choices listed, but the fastest path to the goal course is the plan here, right? That's what we want to advocate for, right? If you've got students that are going to Central, the fastest path should always include this 1011, as it's accepted there as their first math requirement and really is a fantastic course to prep them for future study in the non-STEM pathway. So this is where students can go if they've completed 1010, right? We do still have students who are in the non-STEM pipeline that have 1010 on their transcripts. Again, successful completion at any level will take them to 1200 or 1100. But with a C- or higher, they can move directly into the standalone college algebra and onto the pathway to calculus. With a C- or higher, they can move into Math 1500. This C- is not codified yet. It is currently in governance, and it is in governance for all of the courses in our math sequence, because we have recently learned that all courses get transfer credit at a C-. So by having a C as a prereq, we were actually having a higher standard for our continuing students than we did for transfer students, and we're trying to align with that. And we expect these to be through by the end of the semester, hopefully. And then for students who have completed the 1011, again, with a D-, D+, they can go into the standalone stats or QR. With a C- or higher, they can even open up the door to that math for business, and then business calculus.
So one of the biggest concerns that we've seen is the LAS, Liberal Arts and Science program, and General Studies. And we've noticed that a lot of students are being placed into General Studies, and we get it. I have talked to a lot of advisors, and they've explained to me why they put students into General Studies, which makes complete sense to me. And so, yes, and I understand that for some students, General Studies may be the best option. But we're trying to see if it's possible to put students into the liberal arts and science, especially if they're going to transfer and move on to a four-year college, because that would make more sense to them. The general studies is the program which does have the most number of open electives. So I get why some of the advisors are putting students into that, because students are coming to community colleges not necessarily always to get a degree and to transfer. Our students come for many various reasons, right? So some of them are coming just to take their prereqs here. Some of them are just getting a couple of courses here because they need just a couple of courses before they can go to their college, which they need. So we have a wide variety of students. And one of my advisors told me one size doesn't fit all, and I completely get it. And we're not trying to say that one size does fit all. This is just a guide. This is completely just a guide for you to use if whenever possible, right? So the general studies student doesn't have much of a path to, because it doesn't transfer anywhere. So that's one of the reasons. So if you can put them into liberal arts and science so that they can take those courses that will transfer, right? That program will transfer to a four-year college. So they can take the AS, which is in the STEM pathway, and AA, which is in the non-STEM pathway. So if a student doesn't know what they want to major in, right? They're not sure, but they want at some point may not transfer, I would suggest put them into the LES AA, and then maybe during the course they might decide, okay, let me actually find an actual major that I might be interested in. So they might be able to play around with different courses and find what they're interested in. So that's just a suggestion that if they want to transfer, that would be a good program to put them into. But we do understand why a lot of students are put into general studies, and that's one of the when students pick programs, that's one of the options that they have a choice to pick on DegreeWorks. So now just to kind of recap what we have done today is literally to say that it's kind of to help us change our mindset, right? We've always thought if a student has no placement metric, no GPA, or been out of school for so long, our immediate default method is to put everybody into the developmental courses, right? That's been the way we've always done things. So now we are trying to say, okay, let's figure out the non-STEM from the STEM. And the non-STEM are people who don't need college algebra, and the STEM are the students who need college algebra. That's kind of the breaking of both the groups. And now we're saying, okay, instead of placing non-STEM students into developmental courses, that's been our mindset always. If a student comes in with a low GPA, put them into developmental automatically. That's kind of how we always done things. But now we've given you 3 more options, right? That's all that we've done. That's the only difference. Instead of putting them only into the developmental, you can put them into Math 1000, 1001, 1002, and 1003, right? You can put them into any of those classes. So it's just another option. That's the only difference between last year to this year. And now another thing is we're not mandating the appraisal. We're saying just do the appraisal in your conversation as for the multiple measure, and also to register a student before they're given the PPL, right? That's the other option, the change that we're trying to make. So giving them that option to remediate and move up into their goal course that they want to get into. So the 2 things that are changing is thinking of the 1000 level classes at the same band as the developmental, so they have more options. This again only for the non-STEM, right? They have more options, so they can place into developmental or into 1000, 1001, 1002, or 1003. So those are those 4 options now you have. And for the people in the STEM, the developmental Math 1010, Math 1600, that pathway has not changed at all. Now for students who place into they place into developmental and they take the developmental course, they can take the Math 1011 if they want, if they cannot take the core, right? They could do that. They could take the 1011 and then take the 1100 or 1200 if they wanted. So if they cannot afford to take the core after doing the developmental, then the Math 1011 becomes a really good option for them before taking 1100 or 1200. So this is sort of the general gist of what the changes we've made. Not many changes, just the option for more courses as default courses rather than just developmental for the non-STEM.
And just to sort of highlight, right? And again, not all campuses will have that option, and it's at your discretion and at the advice of your math leadership to determine whether it's appropriate for a student to look at taking one of those options at another campus, whether it's appropriate for your campus to have, put that on the books in the future, or whether the option is for them to go into what you have available on your campus. And again, get them in the course and then give them PPL. So any student who goes into any of the options of default should be registered and then really message, like hit the message. You're registered, but this isn't the perfect class for you. If you could do this within 4 hours, you might be able to get into the perfect class for you, and get them testing, remediated, and retested, and empower them to change their schedule on their own. And just keep in mind that your math team, at your campus, right, your local math team is ready to support you and help you, right? So you may be, you may want to make a meeting with them. They may call a meeting for you, right? There's a lot of support ready for you guys to access. We want to continue to work with you. We are really trying to be responsive to the feedback, because as math people, we like to use data to make decisions. And unfortunately, there just wasn't reliable data on the process that was implemented for this academic year because of the limitations of how do we collect it, right? So at this point, we do want to open it up for questions, which I know that our wonderful host is, she's writing down and she's going to punt to us.
Absolutely, there were a decent amount that came in. So I believe this webinar says it ends at 11. I think it gives us until 11:15. So we have about until then to get everything answered. The first one that came up, and so a lot of the questions came through in the very beginning. So these are gonna be dialing back to the beginning of your presentation. And it was, why is 1011 not an option for non-STEM? That is who it was designed for.
It's absolutely in the non-STEM. Let me backtrack right to the flow chart. So it's absolutely, this is the non-STEM. And you will have this, right? It's absolutely here, but the originators of this course felt strongly that students did need to have some algebraic competency before they would be eligible to be successful in this course. And so it can't be the default placement, because, right, the default placement means that you have no evidence of any mathematical competency other than your non-STEM and your low performing in what metrics you have, or you have no metrics. But 1011 is absolutely a great course in the non-STEM pathway. And in particular for students who are transferring to Central, it should be the first goal course. So again, you would have to register in that scenario, you would have to register as the default if a student came in with no metric into the developmental, and highly encourage remediation with PPL to elevate placement directly into the 1011. If the data indicates, I would hope that the people who are experienced with the 1011 would consider rolling back the prerequisite so that it too wouldn't have one, and then it would be all of those courses. But our understanding was that it didn't require slightly more algebraic competency than the others, and hence, because it retained this prerequisite as a mandatory prerequisite, it's slightly different. It's just an alternate pathway. But that's why we keep, like, we didn't say like first level, we were referring to them as default. So for students for which that's a really good course, the default is automatically the developmental, because that is the best way for them to get there. I hope that answered the question.
Okay. So how many, or will all the campuses be offering courses 1000 through 1003?
No, nope, not even close. There was an ask, but we don't really have data yet to indicate what the need would be. Again, part of that is because we don't have a way to track what it looked like for CT State. There are some campuses that just aren't ready to institute anymore the changes to them, which is understandable. And there are campuses for which this is not as much of a lift. And so I know that there's, discussions amongst the campuses that have said that they're going to really try to add these to their schedule, to offer them in not overlapping timeframes, not overlapping modalities so that students would have choice. But again, if the campus doesn't offer it because we are one system, they do have the option to take it elsewhere. And advisors should also maybe keep a list and suggest to their campuses that they've noticed a need, especially if it's early on, right? If in May you're seeing a strong need at your campus, that becomes an opportunity for you to have that conversation to see if there is any play in the schedule to add a section. Even if you offer one, maybe we need to look at offering two, right? We just unfortunately don't have the information because there's no way to designate STEM or non-STEM for us to look at what the population is. And then we have no way of knowing how students were really placed last fall to say, okay, of the students who are non-STEM, even if we looked at the programmatic level, we don't know how they were placed to know how many would fall into this default placement. So it's just a little bit muddy right now with a lot of unknowns. Hopefully as this rolls out, you know, from fall to spring, we would see a more level of what we need. And that's going to require communication back and forth from the local math teams and the advising teams.
And we can also see as the classes start filling and we see, oh my gosh, the 1001 is already filled. People can offer new sections if you find that, right? So this is kind of the first draft of the schedule is always the first draft, and there's always going to be a lot of changes that come along the path. Or we might decide nobody registered, so we may not be able to offer it. So it's still going to be things that are going to be in motion. They're going to be changes that come along the way. And like Amanda said, communication is key, right? So if advisors can communicate to the math team what should be done or what they're seeing on the ground, because you know what's happening on the ground better than we do. So please let us know. Please let your math teams know what you're seeing and hearing.
Okay. There was also a question about the change. Did the change for did the change for placement for 1000 to 1003 go through governance? The lower GPA of 2.8 is new. So they wanted to know who had changed the placement.
So governance doesn't control placement metrics. The governance process only speaks to prerequisite coursework. So the numbers that that have flexed over, I would say, the last 4 years since we moved away from AccuPlacer in 2020, none of those changes as the bar has gone up or down on GPA, those numbers don't ever go through governance. They're just reflective of what the data shows. And again, the limited data shows that many of the students that were in these classes, that the small number of sections that did run, did come in with those lower metrics and were ultimately successful. And so that was how it was justified, right? So, but never has those changes ever been a part of the governance process. And I wouldn't imagine they ever will be. Because they're data responsive, not curricular responsive. All of these have placement by multiple measures. So it was the one measure changed, and that doesn't go through governance.
Okay. What is the difference between 0988 and the 1000 level courses?
So 0988 is a predominantly algebraic based course. The 0988 is 6 credits and the 0989 is 3 credits, but they are essentially the same course. The extended play version is the 6 credit and the condensed version is the 3 credit. Those courses are developmental. They don't go to graduation, right? And they don't satisfy graduation even at the associate's level. But they do keep all options on the table. So for a student who is utterly undecided, that's a course. Those are courses that would not have put them down the wrong path because they do keep all options open. It's just at the conclusion of them, they've not checked any boxes on their associate level graduation checklist. So those are the primary differences between developmental and 1000 level, is that the 1000 levels don't cover the scope of algebra, because they're not going to all the courses, right? So since those developmental courses do include the STEM pathway, they have to serve the STEM pathway as well. Whereas the 1003, that doesn't go to the STEM pathway. It doesn't need to serve the STEM pathway. So it's a little bit smaller scope and depth of knowledge in it, which may be one of the contributing factors to the success of the course in comparison to the developmental. So
Okay. And this is more of a note from someone, an informative note. It's important to note that if students don't have any placement metrics and want to enroll in the default placement, an override will have to be placed on SFASP RPO to ensure seamless enrollment. There is currently nothing in Banner and DegreeWorks that could be programmed for a default placement.
I think that it would work by just, I'm not sure about that. I will have to talk to
I
the
think we're
Banner
gonna
team
talk-
because
we're
students are
talking-
able to register in the 0989 without any kind of override. And I think that's based on the placement metrics that we have, right? So for a student who has nothing, you would indicate a GPA of 0, which is less than 2.8, and that should allow it. But we can definitely, that I feel like I think we have to follow up with the Banner team. Or I see Dean DiMatteo has just jumped in. The question was, how do students that have nothing become eligible for default placement into the 1000 level without an override? Would an advisor simply just put in a 0 as the GPA and then that opens the door?
I don't have a knowledge on how that would work in Banner.
I think
No, I don't.
Jennifer's on this call, so maybe she can answer it because I just got
Hmm.
it. So
What's it?
Jennifer
Mimi?
Mimi?
Yeah,
Sorry, I just have to grab them. And
she,
then I
she
can...
just put in now saying you're saying that non-STEM students can take 1000 to
Oh, okay,
1000.
perfect. So let me
Not
just...
1011, but 1003, Jen.
Okay,
She's got
Jennifer,
unmute
I'm
herself.
gonna let you unmute yourself. Just hang on 1 second. I just have to pull you up in a different section. Let's see. Let's see if it'll let me.
Goal is no, you would not have to need an override.
That's
So
Thanks for
Um,
letting
So
me chime
Jennifer,
in.
I just made you a panelist. That's the only way you can talk.
Okay.
So,
Can you folks hear me?
yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'm actually the one that put that initial note in. And I apologize about the typo, the 1000 through 1003. So you're correct in that students would be able to register no problem for the lowest level, the 0988. But if you're saying that non-STEM students are permitted to take 1000 through 1003 with a 2.8 or lower as a default, or if they don't have a placement, then there is no mechanism, there's no way in Banner to program that. And there's also no way in Banner to program, unfortunately, 2 different course recommendations for the same metric. So if a non-STEM student has a 2.7 and you're saying that they can enroll in 1000 through 1003, a student that wants to take the STEM track with a 2.7 and you're saying that they would have to take a higher math and shouldn't be permitted to take a lower math, we can't program that. So unless I'm interpreting some of these updates wrong, which I very well could be, there's a lot of updates here. I want to have a conversation to ensure that what you're proposing here can actually be effectively programmed in Banner. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense because what you're saying is a student who is non-STEM will see the same kind of placement because they could accidentally be taking the STEM student could accidentally be taking the 1000 when they shouldn't be. Is
Right.
that what you're saying? Right? Because if you make all of them under the default placement, so yeah, that was one of the questions we had, if it was some way, if we could branch them so that they wouldn't be allowed to take the 1000 because that wouldn't be the best course for them. For them, if you're a STEM pathway student, you should be taking the 0988 and 0989. That would be the best course for them. and
Right,
not any of the
understood.
others.
So, yeah, we'll have to talk, we can definitely chat
Yeah.
online and
We can
just,
figure
yeah,
out
my
how-
initial comment is unfortunately, there's no way to branch.
Right, no,
Um,
I understand that. I
But yeah,
understand that.
we can try and work out something that would
So
support so that
something
it's a
to
seamless.
say that says students in the STEM should take this or something like that, because again, I don't know how these things look from a student, how they see things. What are the, when
Sure.
they get a,
We
what are
only
the
have 5
options?
minutes, Marina.
Okay, all right.
But thank you for giving me the time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank
Jennifer.
you,
We'll
thank you.
definitely be following up with you.
So speaking of that, because we do only have a couple minutes left, I have the full chat, which also lists everyone who is asking questions. So I will forward that to you too, and if that will be helpful in addressing questions we may not get back to.
Okay, thank
Um,
you.
So this placement guidelines document does not currently indicate that students with a GPA lower than 2.8 can take math 1000 through 1012. Is this effective for fall 2024? And who's responsible for updating the document so that necessary folks have the same information? And who updates it on the website so prospective students know about these updates?
This is
Not
for
100%
2024.
sure who handles the website.
This is effective for fall 2024 though.
In limited, right? If this is limited, in effect, in a limited capacity, which is at the capacity for which these 1000-level courses are available.
Are available,
right?
yeah. For
Right.
those-
So in many instances, there won't be any change from what was already there. But yes, I am making a note that we need to work on making sure documents are updated, distributed, and the website as well. But the only change in anything that was forward facing is these 3 scores for these 4 classes. Everything else remained the same. So even the PPL scores for recommendations will remain the same, but because we're pushing PPL to an after registration piece, we just chose not to display it here.
Okay. Will there be a system for students to receive ALEKS, ALEKS instructions upon acceptance into CT State? This way they can come to advising with it already completed?
No, that is the piece that is definitively needs to change. It is cost prohibitive for every student who was accepted to take a test that could cost up to $25 if they're not ready to begin their math journey. Or to do the work to remediate, right? So this product is designed for students who have a demonstrated need to elevate placement. They're not in the course they need by what they present with, and a desire. So it is not intended to be a pre-thing. The students get enrolled in their math class, then they leave with directions should the student be motivated to want to elevate their placement.
Okay. Just a suggestion that if you mentioned the course titles along with the course codes, it would be helpful.
In the chart, yeah, for sure.
Just to clarify, when utilizing GPA, will it be self-reported or official?
Because GPA has always had a limited placement levels, we have to accept either.
When will the new PPL code be available?
Is David still on the call?
No, I think he's gone. No, but I think it's soon. They're working on it right now.
There is a team working on it now. And so I would definitely, I would feel comfortable saying by the end of the month for certain, but potentially by the end of next week, I think is also possible.
If a student places into developmental or 1000 to 1004 level and we give ALEKS, does it need to be proctored in order for them to level up?
That's the goal. That is the goal. Right. So what we saw now, again, only 10% of students retested, but the retest was in a proctored environment, and it appeared to be more realistic, the results. So for instance, students took it at home, Many of them placed into pre-calculus, did 4 hours of remediation, took it proctored and placed into developmental. So there's a little bit of little too much opportunity for students to use unsupported resources to elevate their placement. And we are trying to discourage that.
Okay, and I'm gonna wrap it up now because I'm afraid it's gonna turn off on us because we've hit 11:15, but I will forward the remaining questions to Amanda and Marina. And would it be fair to say people can reach out to you directly?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And so I'll be placing the recording of this presentation as well as the slide deck onto ctstate.edu/webinars next week. It doesn't usually get processed until the end of the day, so it'll be early next week. And thank you all for coming out. This was a really lively discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, have a wonderful day.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.